My name is Kim Hinton, and I'm 31 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my sister sat me on a folding chair from the garage, and 2 hours later, her 7-year-old threw a fork at my chest and told the table what his mom calls me. He said it the way kids say the weather. Mom says you're the help. 8 adults laughed. My sister laughed the loudest, and my mom looked down at her plate and kept cutting her turkey. I finished my food. I washed my own dish. Then I folded that chair, tucked it under my arm, and carried it out to my car while nobody got up. At 11:40 that night, my sister texted me. Know your place? I typed back that I did, and I told her to check her mortgage. What I did next didn't take a lawyer, or a speech, or one raised voice. It took one email that I did not send. And by 6 the next morning, my brother-in-law was standing in his dark kitchen, telling my sister the bank was on the phone. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones. The women who kept the receipts, held the line, and finally stopped explaining themselves. If a story here ever sounds like your own family, you are not imagining it. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I got to 41 Kestrel Court at 12:20, 40 minutes early, because I was bringing 2 trays of mashed potatoes and a pie, and both of them needed oven time. I went in through the side door into the kitchen, the way I always do. Nobody said hello. Danielle was arranging little bowls of olives on a slate board, and she pointed her elbow at the counter by the sink. Set those down over there. So I set them down over there. The dining room at my sister's house holds 12, and it has these upholstered chairs the color of heavy cream, and Danielle picked them out herself over 4 weekends in 2019. That afternoon, there were 11 cream chairs at that table. At the far end, past the corner, there was a folding metal chair from the garage with a smear of dried paint on one leg. She caught me looking at it. We ran out, she said. You don't mind? I said I didn't mind because I didn't. Not yet. Colleen Voss, my brother-in-law's mother, got poured a glass of red before she had finished taking her coat off. I got myself water from the tap. Through the glass door I could see the new pool, drained for the season and covered in a taut blue tarp, and past that, on the driveway, the Tahoe they bought in June. I do books for 19 small businesses in Clay County, so I don't look at things like that the way most people look at them. I don't see a pool. I see a number, and a term, and a monthly payment. I knew what that pool cost. I knew what that truck cost. And I knew things about that house that nobody at that table knew. We sat down at 2:40. Cooper is 7, and he was pushing turkey around his plate with the flat of his fork and not eating any of it, and his mother was at the other end of the table telling Colleen about a tile they almost used in the powder room. So I reached over. It's a reflex. I've been cutting that kid's food since he had 8 teeth. I put my hand near his plate and he pulled his arm back hard and the fork came up out of his fist and caught me on the chest, right on the gray wool, and dropped down onto the rug. He wasn't angry. That's the part that stayed with me. He looked at me the way you look at somebody who's walked into the wrong room. You don't have to, he said. Mom says you're the help. There was maybe half a second of nothing. Then Trey laughed. One big bark of it, and Colleen laughed. And my cousin Shane laughed. And then all of them were laughing. 8 grown adults at a Thanksgiving table, and Danielle was laughing hardest of anybody with her hand flat on her collarbone. Kids, she said. They repeat everything. Somebody said out of the mouths of babes. Somebody else asked for the gravy. And down at my end of the table, my mother, Rhonda Hinton, who cleaned rooms at the Blue Stem Inn for 15 years, looked at her plate and cut a piece of turkey and put it in her mouth and did not look up. I bent down and picked the fork up off the rug and set it on the edge of my plate. Cooper was already eating. He'd said his piece and moved on, the way you do when you've only reported the weather. He wasn't wrong about anything. He was just early. And the laughing was still going when I looked down at the chair I was sitting on. I ate everything on my plate. I want to be clear about that because for a long time I thought that was dignity, and it wasn't. It was just habit. When the plates started stacking, I carried mine into the kitchen and washed it and set it in the rack, and then I put my coat on and went back to the doorway of the dining room and told Danielle I was heading out. She didn't get up. She turned in her cream chair with her wine still in her hand and said, "You're not going to say goodbye to everybody?" And I said I just did. Then I walked the length of that table, past all of them, and I took hold of the folding chair, and I closed it. Metal on metal, that flat clack it makes. It's a loud sound in a room full of people who are pretending nothing happened. I put it under my arm. Trey said, laughing again, "Kim, leave the chair." Danielle said my name once, in that voice she uses for waiters who bring the wrong thing. I didn't answer either of them. I walked out the front door with it and I put it in the trunk of my Corolla, and I remember the cold coming up off the driveway and the smell of somebody's fireplace 2 houses down. When I came around to the driver's side, Cooper had his face pressed against the front window, both hands cupped around his eyes, watching me. I raised my hand. He waved back with his whole arm, the way little kids do, like they're flagging down a ship. Then I got in and backed out past the Tahoe. That chair was the only thing in that house that belonged to me, and it took me 6 years to notice. It's 14 minutes from Kestrel Court to my place if you catch the light at 69th. I rent half a duplex at 1912 Ardmore Street in Halstead, $950 a month, 1 bedroom, a kitchen you can touch both walls of. I've lived there 6 years. I drive a 2014 Corolla that I paid off in 2019, and I wear the same gray wool coat every winter. And none of that is a hardship, it's arithmetic. I'm a CPA. I've been at Brandt and Roan in North Kansas City for 9 years since I was 22, and I was up for senior manager in February. What I actually do all day is close books for people who own auto shops and dental practices and heating companies. I know which businesses in this county are 2 bad months from gone, and I know it before the owners do, because the numbers say it first and people say it last. For 7 years, I also did the tax returns for everybody in my family, free, every spring, sitting at my own kitchen table in March with their shoeboxes and their envelopes and their glove box receipts. My mother's, my Aunt Bev's, my cousin Shane's, my sister's, and her husband's, and his company's personal side. I stopped in the spring of 2023. I didn't announce it. I just told them all to find somebody, and they grumbled about it for a week, and then they found somebody. Not one person in my family ever asked me why. Not one. That should have told me something, and it did. But not for another 2.5 years. We grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on Fisher Street with a radiator that banged all night in January. My mother cleaned rooms at the Blue Stem Inn out by the highway for 15 years and then did 9 more in the cafeteria at Halstead Elementary. And when she came home at 11 at night, her hands smelled like bleach and hotel soap, and she'd sit at the kitchen table with her tips in front of her and count them out loud. She always counted twice. She'd say each number, then go back through the whole stack again and say them all a second time, because when it's $41, you can't afford to be wrong about it. My dad, Wayne, drove a route for a bakery distributor for 26 years, out the door at 3:15 in the morning. He died in March of 2017, 55 years old, sitting in his truck in the lot behind the warehouse with the engine running. When I moved into my first apartment in 2016, he came over with a roll of masking tape and a marker and labeled everything I owned, every box, every lamp, the legs of every chair, like I was going off to camp. K. Hinton. Block letters. He did that for both of us. And the whole time we were growing up, my mother taught us exactly one rule for how to live in the world, and she said it about landlords, and she said it about teachers, and she said it about my dad's dispatcher, and she said it about my sister's first boyfriend. People like us don't make a scene. Danielle is 5 years older than me. She remembers Fisher Street better than I do. She remembers the smell of it. She remembers waiting at a counter while somebody decided whether to help us. She spent 20 years getting away from that apartment. I spent 20 years paying its bills. Danielle met Trey Voss in 2013 at a Builders Association dinner she went to for work. They married in 2016. Cooper came in 2018. And in June of 2019, they closed on Kestrel Court. And that is when my sister became somebody else. Or maybe just became who she'd been aiming at the whole time. It started with how she talked about people. The girl at the salon, our lawn guy, the window man. Nobody had a name anymore. They had a function, and she said it warmly. That's what people always miss about her. Danielle is never cold about it. She'd say our cleaning lady the same way she'd say our accountant. At the housewarming, she walked me around to the neighbors with her hand on my back and introduced me as my sister. She's in numbers. Not an accountant. In numbers. Trey filled the cooler that day and wouldn't let anybody else pay for anything, because that's Trey. He is genuinely generous in any room with witnesses in it. Voss Mechanical was 11 employees at its best, commercial heating and air, and he ran it out of a shop off Highway 69 with his name on the sign in 3-foot letters. And every February, I sat at my kitchen table with their statements and their invoices and their year-end, and I could see the whole shape of their year before either one of them could. By 2021, I knew what their money did better than they did. That isn't a brag. That's the entire problem. I got home from Thanksgiving a little after 7. I leaned the folding chair against the wall in my hallway, where it sat looking like something somebody left behind, and I ate a bowl of cereal standing up. And I answered 2 client emails, and I didn't think about the fork once, which is its own kind of lying. At 11:40, my phone buzzed on the counter. Danielle. Cooper is a child, she wrote. He didn't mean anything, and you embarrassed him. And you embarrassed me, in front of Colleen, in my own house, walking out with a chair like a lunatic. I read that twice. Then the second message came in under it, and it wasn't long, and it didn't need to be. Know your place. I sat down on the floor of my hallway with my back against the wall. Not dramatically. My legs just did it. I sat there for a while and looked at that chair leaning across from me, and I thought about my mother cutting her turkey and not looking up, and I thought about Cooper waving at me through the glass with his whole arm because he still likes me. He just knows what I am. I typed 3 different things and deleted all 3. What I finally sent was short. I do, I wrote. Check your mortgage. The reply came fast. A question mark. Then, 30 seconds later, you don't even own a house. Then nothing. She was right, technically. I don't own a house. I own something better than a house, and I had owned it for 2 years and 8 months, and it was recorded down at the Clay County Courthouse in a book anybody could have pulled for $3. The house cost $624,000 in June of 2019. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a dining room built to hold 12. They financed it with Crossland Bank, a first deed of trust of $499,200, 30-year fixed at 4%. Principal and interest came to $2,383 a month, and with taxes and insurance, the note ran a little over $3,100. That was fine. I want to say that clearly, because people always want the villain to have been stupid from the beginning, and they weren't. In 2019, that house was affordable. Trey had 11 guys and a contract with a hospital system. Danielle was still selling, and the whole thing penciled. I did their return that year, and it was a good year. At the housewarming, Danielle asked if she could borrow some chairs, because they were still short, and I brought over the 2 folding ones from my hallway closet, and I put them in her garage myself. She never gave them back, and I never asked. That's a very small thing, and I've thought about it more than I'd like to admit. What I did notice at the end of that first year, sitting at my kitchen table with the Voss Mechanical numbers, was that the receivables were slow. Not bad. Slow. 68 days when it should have been 40. I mentioned it once, in a text, and Trey sent back a thumbs up. The house was fine in 2019. Everything that killed it came later, and every single piece of it was signed. In the fall of 2021, Voss Mechanical lost the hospital contract to an outfit out of Lenexa, and by February of 2022, Trey needed $118,000 to cover payroll and finish a job he'd already spent the deposit on. No bank was going to give him that unsecured. So he went to Ridgeline Capital Partners in Overland Park, and Ridgeline gave him a second deed of trust on the house. $118,000, interest only, 11.5%. $11.31 a month, every month, and then the entire principal balloons due in March of 2027. I found out because Danielle mentioned it at my mother's birthday, like it was a bridge loan for a kitchen. I went home and I built the schedule myself, and I sent them both an email that ran 2 pages, with the amortization pasted into the body so nobody had to open an attachment. I laid out what interest only means. I laid out that in 5 years they'd owe the entire $118,000 in one payment, in a single month, in the same spring Cooper started 3rd grade. I gave them 2 other options, including one that was slower and uglier and would have worked. Trey signed at Ridgeline 3 days later. Danielle texted me one line about it and I still have it. "You're not on the title, Kim." And she was right about that too. I wasn't the borrower. I wasn't a guarantor. I had no standing to stop a grown man from signing a document in a conference room in another state, and there is no version of that where I get to be the hero. 6 months later, they stopped paying it. Nobody told me. I found out the way I find out everything. On paper. Ridgeline sent the notice of default in February of 2023. They hadn't made a payment since September. With the arrears and the fees, the payoff came to $121,600, and Ridgeline gave them 30 days to cure it, or the trustees' sale process started. I know all of this because at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, my sister showed up at my duplex on Ardmore Street for the first time in 3 years. She'd never seen the inside of it. She stood in my doorway with her coat still on and her keys still in her hand, and she said, "We're going to lose it." Cooper starts kindergarten at Kestrel next fall. He picked out his bedroom. She was crying in a way I had not seen since our father's funeral, which is to say, quietly and furiously, like she was mad at her own face for doing it. And then she asked me for $121,600 in my kitchen. With the light over the stove on, I told her the truth, which is that I had $61,000 and that it was all of it, and that it had taken me 7 years. She looked at me for a second and she said, "Then what good are you?" Then her face did something and she said, I'm sorry. That isn't what I meant." And she left. She was in my apartment maybe 9 minutes. I sat on my front step until 2 in the morning in November air with no coat on. She asked what good I was. I spent the next 3 weeks answering that question, and I never once said the answer out loud. Here is the thing my family never understood about what I do for a living. I do the books for 2 men in Liberty who buy paper. That's the whole business. When somebody stops paying a private loan, the lender often doesn't want the house and doesn't want the fight. So they sell the note itself to somebody else at a discount and walk away clean, and it is as ordinary as selling a used truck. So I called Ridgeline Capital Partners on a Monday morning in March of 2023, and I asked what they'd take for it. They were sitting in second position behind a bank, on a house in a county they didn't work in, with a borrower who'd gone dark. They didn't want to foreclose. They wanted out. We settled at $61,000. That was $46,000 of savings, 7 years of it, every raise I never spent, from $52,000 a year when I started up to $91,000 that year, in a $950 a month duplex with a paid-off Corolla and no kids, and $15,000 from my father's life insurance, which I had not touched since 2017 because I could not think of a single thing to spend it on that he would have thought was worth it. I wired it on March 20th. My checking account went to $411, and I sat in my car in the credit union parking lot and put both hands on the wheel and just breathed for a minute. The assignment of deed of trust recorded at Clay County on March 21st, 2023, in favor of Ledger Rock Holdings, a single-member company I'd formed in February for exactly that purpose. I hired Anchorline Loan Servicing to service it, $95 a month, because a private party collecting on a mortgage without a licensed servicer is a person who has decided to break federal law by accident. And I did not tell them. That was my choice, and I owned it. I told myself that if they knew, it would be a favor, and favors have to be repaid, and repaying it would break them. If they didn't know, it would just be their house. That spring, I quit doing everybody's taxes and I filed a written conflict disclosure with Margaret Rohn, my managing partner, on March 24th. For 3 years, I told myself I was being generous. I was paying rent. I want to stop here for a second because this is the part I had wrong the whole time. If you have ever quietly covered something for your family and never told them, a payment, a bill, a shift nobody else wanted, tell me in the comments. Not the amount. Just that you did it. I think there are a lot more of us than we know. Subscribe if you want to hear how this ended. The first thing I did as the holder of that note was cut their payment. Anchorline sent them a written forbearance agreement in April of 2023, dropping them from $11.31 a month to $500, interest only, from an investor who had purchased the loan. 9 payments were due that year, and they made all 9, $4,500. In 2024, I cut it again, to $300 a month, and out of 12 payments they made 8, $2,400. In 2025, I put them on full deferral, everything accruing, nothing due, and they paid nothing at all, which was the correct decision on their end, and I'd have advised it. So across 3 years, on $61,000 of my own money, I took in $6,900. And here is the part that matters more than any of it. That note carries a default rate of 18%. From the day of default, I was entitled to run the balance up at 18%, plus late fees, plus collection costs. And it would have been legal and standard, and nobody would have blinked. I never charged a dollar of it. The payoff on that loan was $121,600 on the day I bought it, and it was $121,600 every single morning after. Frozen. While that was happening, they poured a gunite pool in October of 2025 and financed it, and they bought the Tahoe in June, and my sister hosted 12 people for Thanksgiving with a slate board of olives. And on the 27th of every month, I sent Anchorline a 1-line email telling them to take no action in the coming cycle. 32 months. I never missed one. So go back to Thanksgiving night with me. 11:52, my car parked at the curb outside 1912 Ardmore, engine off, and I hadn't gone in yet because my hands were still doing that thing where they won't quite hold still. The chair was in the back seat. I'd put it there instead of the trunk when I stopped for gas, and now the dome light was on and I was turned around in my seat looking at it, and I don't know why I reached back and tipped it over. But I did. And there, on the underside of the left leg, on the metal, was a strip of masking tape gone the color of weak tea, and on it, in black marker, in my father's block letters, was K. Hinton. He wrote that in 2016 in my first apartment on a Saturday, with the radio on. I brought it to her housewarming in 2019 because she was short on chairs. 6 years later, my sister sat me on it at the end of her table, past the corner, and told me not to mind. I want to be honest about what that did, because it wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier and it would have burned off by Sunday. What it was clarity, and clarity is a much worse houseguest. I opened my laptop on the steering wheel with the dome light still on, and I started the 33rd email. Anchorline, please continue to hold all action on the Voss account through the next cycle. I'd typed some version of that 32 times. I read it. I read it again. And then I put the cursor in it and I deleted it, and I closed the laptop, and I sat there. That's all I did. I want that understood. I didn't send anything. I didn't call anybody. I didn't make a scene. The instruction expired at midnight, and I sat in my car in the dark and watched the clock on the dash change over. At 6:05 on Friday morning, the 28th of November, Anchorline's default queue did what it had been built to do the moment nobody stopped it. It released a breach letter and a notice of intent to accelerate to the borrowers of record by certified mail. It sent a courtesy copy to the servicer of the first deed of trust, which is standard practice for a junior lien holder protecting its position, and which is also required under the terms of that note. And it ran the phone number on file through the morning dialer, so while it was still dark out, in a kitchen on Kestrel Court, my brother-in-law's phone lit up on the counter, and a recorded voice said the name of a servicing company and the words, Default Resolution Department. And Trey stood there in his shorts with the refrigerator humming and said the only thing that made sense to him. It's the bank. That part I got from him later, in December, in the one calm phone call we ever had. It was not the bank. I want to be precise, because this is the piece everybody gets wrong when they tell this story back to me. That was a loan servicer in Arizona following a standing instruction that had simply run out. Their bank called on Monday. I didn't know any of it was happening until 7:14, when Anchorline emailed me the confirmation of mailing, which is a form they send whether you want it or not. I read it in my kitchen with a coffee I hadn't sat down with yet. By the time I finished that cup, I had 9 missed calls. None of them were from my mother. Our family group chat has 14 people in it, and most years it is entirely photographs of other people's dogs. That Friday it went off like a smoke alarm. Aunt Bev wanted to know if everyone was okay. Cousin Shane, who has never read a document in his life, announced that somebody bought our loan, which was closer to the truth than he knew, and he had no idea what it meant. Somebody asked if it was a scam. Somebody else said those people call her all the time and you just block them. Danielle left me 4 voicemails between 8 and noon. In the first one, she was brisk. In the second one, she was crying. In the third one, she was talking to Trey with the phone still going. And in the fourth one, she said the line I will hear for the rest of my life. Whatever you think you did last night, undo it. I did not answer any of them. I want to tell you that not answering felt powerful. It did not. Doing something is easy. Doing something gives your hands a job. Not doing anything, on purpose, all day, while a phone lights up on a table across the room, is the hardest physical work I have ever done. I went to the grocery store. I did a load of towels. On Monday, I got up at 6 and drove to North Kansas City and closed out a quarter for a veterinary clinic. Undo it. Like it was a text message. Like a servicing company is a person you can call back and apologize to. Monday, December 1st, the default resolution group at Crossland Bank called Danielle's cell at 9:20 in the morning. Here is why, and I'll say it once, plainly. When you sign a deed of trust, you promise the bank you will keep the property clear of other defaulted liens, and servicers use lien monitoring services that flag exactly that. Anchorline's courtesy notice hit Crossland's file on Friday. On Monday, a woman in Ohio opened a loss mitigation review and called to ask what their plan was to cure the junior default. Danielle could not understand it. She kept saying, "But we're current with you." And they were current with Crossland. $3,100 a month. Never late. My sister is not careless about the things people can see. What she could not get her head around was why her bank cared about somebody else's loan. It cared because a bank in second position behind a bank in first is a set of dominoes standing in a line, and every lender in the country knows where the last one falls. Trey spent that whole week on the phone. He called Ridgeline, and a man there told him, politely, that Ridgeline had sold that note in the spring of 2023 and had no further interest in the matter. That is the first moment anybody in my family thought to look at the county record for the house they lived in. It had been sitting there, public, searchable, $3 for a certified copy, for 2 years and 8 months. That week I worked. I closed December quarterlies for a body shop in Gladstone and a veterinary clinic on Antioch. And I ate lunch at my desk, and I did not breathe a word of it to anyone in that office, which in hindsight was a mistake I paid for later. My mother called Wednesday evening. She did not ask me what happened. She did not ask me if I was all right, or what the fork thing was about, or why I'd walked out with a chair. She said, "Kimmy." And then she said, "Can you just fix it?" I asked her what she thought I could fix. And she said the sentence she has been saying to me since I was 6 years old, in the exact same tone, the one that isn't angry, the one that's tired. "People like us don't make a scene." I said, "I didn't make a scene, Mom." And I had one more word ready after that, a small one, and I have had it ready ever since. But she hung up before I got to it. Not to be cruel. She has hung up on the end of my sentences my entire life, because to her a phone call is a thing you complete and then set down. I stood in my kitchen for a minute with the phone still in my hand. On December 9th, Trey drove down to the Clay County Recorder of Deeds and paid $3 for a certified copy of the assignment. It's 1 page. It says that Ridgeline Capital Partners assigned all beneficial interest in that deed of trust to Ledger Rock Holdings, effective March 21st, 2023, and it is stamped, and it is numbered, and it has been available to any human being who walked in that door for 2 years and 8 months. Ledger Rock Holdings meant nothing to him. So he did what anybody would do next, which is go to the Missouri Secretary of State business search and type it in. That takes about 20 seconds. Organizer and registered agent, Kimberly A. Hinton, 1912 Ardmore Street, Halstead, Missouri. My name, my street, my apartment number, sitting on a state website since February of 2023, where my sister could have found it any night she couldn't sleep. He called me at 4:40 in the afternoon. I was in my car in the parking garage. I expected him to scream. Trey did not scream. He said my name once, and then he was quiet for a long moment, and then he asked, very softly, "How long?" And I told him the date. Since March 21st, 2023. He said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." And he hung up. 40 minutes later, I had 206 notifications on my phone. Vulture was the word that stuck. Somebody used it first and then everybody used it, the way a family will pick up a word and pass it around until it's a fact. She's been sitting on this. She's been holding this over them for years. She waited until Thanksgiving. That last one really traveled because it made a shape people could see. The quiet sister in the gray coat waiting 3 years for a holiday to spring a trap. Aunt Bev sent me a long message that ended with the line, "You could have just helped her, Kimmy." Cousin Shane sent a laughing emoji to something and then left the chat. Somebody's husband said he'd always thought there was something about me. And in 9 days, in a chat with 14 people in it, in 4 voicemails and 2 phone calls and 1 confrontation in a title office a month later, not one member of my family asked me the only question that mattered. Nobody asked what I paid. Nobody asked what I'd received. Nobody asked why the balance on that loan hadn't moved $1 in 3 years. My mother called on the 11th and the first thing out of her mouth was, "How could you do this to your sister?" And I said, "Mom, ask me what I paid for it." There was the pause on the line that I could feel in my chest, and then she said, "That's not the point. That was the whole thing. Right there. Nobody wanted the number. They wanted the story." On December 15th, Trey filed a complaint against me with the Missouri State Board of Accountancy, alleging that I had used confidential client information for personal gain. Then he called the main line at Brant and Roan and asked to speak to whoever was in charge of ethics, and he talked for 11 minutes. Margaret Roan called me into her office at 8 the next morning. Margaret is 57. She has run that firm for 2 decades, and she is not a cruel woman. I put a folder on her desk. Inside it was my conflict disclosure, dated March 24, 2023, filed the week I bought that note, stating that I held a beneficial interest in a family member's obligation and that I was withdrawing from all preparation work for any related party, 3 years ahead of him. She read it and she closed the folder and she said, "I know, I have this." And then she told me what was going to happen anyway. The firm would erect a wall. I'd be pulled off anything in Clay County that touched real estate, off 2 clients I'd had for 6 years, and the file would sit open until the board disposed of it. And my senior manager review, scheduled for the 2nd week of February, was postponed indefinitely. She said that word twice, indefinitely, because she wanted me to hear it. Then she said the sentence I actually think about. "Kim, you need outside counsel on this. You cannot be your own accountant here." That's how I lost it. Not the money, the numbers. The best numbers person in any room I have ever walked into handed her own file to somebody else because she was too close to read it. 9 years. 1 phone call from a man who has never finished a document in his life. Nora Pike does note and real estate work out of a converted house on the square in Liberty, and she is 48 and reads faster than anybody I have ever met. She went through my whole file in about 11 minutes, and then she capped her pen and laid out 4 roads. 1. Accelerate and take it to a trustee's sale. Legal, available, and here is what it actually buys you. You'd be foreclosing in second position, so you take the property still carrying Crossland's $435,300, and you make their $23.83 a month out of your own checking account, and to protect your position at the sale, you'd need real cash on the courthouse steps. Do you have that? I said no. She said, correct. So that road is theoretical. 2. Sell the note. It's a seasoned file with real equity behind it. 55 to 60 cents, call it 70,000, closed in 3 weeks. And you never think about these people again. 3. Keep forbearing forever. 4. Do nothing, and let the first mortgage grind. Then she put the pen down and asked me the question nobody else asked in the entire 3 years. She said, "What do you actually want?" And I heard myself say it out loud for the first time in my life. For 3 years, I told myself I was being generous. I wasn't. I was paying rent. She didn't blink. She said, "Then stop paying it." That's not a legal strategy, Kim. That's just the answer. If you're still with me, I'd ask you one thing. Somewhere in your life, there's a bill you have been paying that never had your name on it. Not money, the other kind. If you know exactly what it is right now, put a single word in the comments. You don't have to explain it, and I won't ask. Subscribe and stay with me, because the next part is the room where all of this landed. On December 23rd, I drove out to Kestrel Court to drop off a casserole dish and pick up a box of my mother's things she'd left there in October. I texted first. Nobody answered, so I went anyway, and the garage door was up. Danielle was sitting on the step between the garage and the mudroom in a big cardigan with a stack of envelopes on her knees and a pen. She didn't hear the car. She was counting out loud. 682, then 400, then 229. And then she went back to the top of the stack and said all 3 numbers again. In order, a second time, to be sure. That is exactly how our mother counted her tips on the kitchen table on Fisher Street in 2003, out loud, twice. Because when it's small, you cannot afford to be wrong about it. Danielle does not know she does that. I would bet the whole note on it. Cooper came skidding around the corner with a fistful of change and shoved it at me and asked me to count it. Because I'm the one who counts things. And I sat down on the cold concrete and stacked it into 5s. $1.15. He said thanks and ran back inside. Danielle looked up then. She wasn't angry. She looked tired all the way through. She said, "Nobody's being mean, Kim. That's just what people call it." I put the dish on the workbench and I picked up my mother's box and I said okay. And I left. She counts like our mother. She would rather lose that house than know it. On January 6th, a woman named Patrice Cole called me from Meridian Title and Escrow in Liberty. Very pleasant, very neutral, the voice of somebody who has told 400 people bad news this year and never once made it personal. She said she was calling the holder of the second deed of trust on 41 Kestrel Court regarding a refinancing process, and she needed to know whether I would be executing a subordination agreement. Here is what that means. And it took me 3 years to understand that this, and not foreclosure, was the actual thing I had. Trey and Danielle were refinancing the first mortgage. When you refinance, the old first loan gets paid off and released, and the second the old first is released, my lien, which had been sitting quietly behind it since 2022, moves up. First in time, first in right. My loan becomes the senior loan on that house. No bank on earth will lend $521,000 and sit in second position behind somebody's sister. So for their new loan to close, I have to voluntarily sign a 1-page document agreeing to stay underneath it. That's it. That's the whole weapon. Not a foreclosure, not a courtroom. A signature I am under no obligation to give. If I don't sign, the loan does not fund. Patrice said, "Closing is set for the 16th, 2 o'clock. Will you be signing?" For 3 years, I'd been holding a gun I had no intention of firing, and nobody told me the real weapon was a pen. As line holder of record, I was entitled to the preliminary title report, and Meridian emailed it to me that same afternoon. I read it at my kitchen table at 10 at night with a legal pad. The first mortgage was there. Crossland. Balance $435,300. My deed of trust was there, recorded March of 2022 and assigned to me in March of 2023. And then there were 2 lines I had never seen. A judgment line, Bellamy Supply Company against Voss Mechanical and against Trey Voss personally, recorded in August of 2025, $47,300, and a federal tax lien for unpaid payroll taxes, filed against Voss Mechanical in September of 2025, $28,900. So I ran the closing. The new loan was $521,600, which is 80% of the January appraisal of $652. Pay off Crossland, $435,300. closing costs and prepaids, $14,700. That leaves $71,600 on the table. Those two liens together are $76,200, and the title company cannot insure a new first while they sit there. So the deal is $4,600 short before $1 reaches me. There was never going to be a payoff. There was never room for one. And Trey scheduled a closing anyway, and told his mother about it, and told my mother about it. I sat there with my pen on the pad for a long time. The other thing I understood at that table, at 10 at night, was that my sister had never seen those two lines in her life. They didn't lose that house at Thanksgiving. They lost it in August, when a supply company recorded one page at the courthouse, and nobody in that family read it. Meridian Title and Escrow is in a low brick building on the north side of Liberty, between a laundromat and a place that sells above-ground pools. It's 19 minutes from my office. Nora Pike drove separately and met me in the lot at 10 till 2 on Friday, January 16th, and she said one thing to me before we went in, which was, "You don't have to explain yourself in there, you only have to answer what you're asked." The conference room had a laminate table and a fluorescent fixture with one tube that ticked, and a coffee pot that had been on since 11 and smelled like it. There were 6 chairs. Danielle was in one, in a blazer, with her hair done, and Trey was next to her with his phone face down, and Colleen Voss sat at the end with her purse in her lap, and her coat still buttoned. The loan officer had his laptop open. Patrice Cole sat at the head with 3 stacks of paper squared up in front of her. Trey had told all of them the investor was coming at 2 to sign, and not one of them had thought to ask who that was. When the door opened, my sister stood up too fast and knocked over her water bottle, and Colleen reached out and set it upright without a word, and nobody said anything at all for about 4 seconds. Then Nora and I came in, and there were 7 of us and 6 chairs. Nobody offered. The loan officer looked at the table and then at his screen. So I stood, next to the wall, with my folder under my arm, and I want you to understand that I did not plan that and I did not mind it. Patrice Cole opened the top stack and did not look up and said, in exactly the tone she'd use for anybody, "Ms. Hinton, you're here as the holder of the second deed of trust. Are you signing today?" Not one person in that room had ever heard me say anything about money in my life. My sister had known me for 31 years and had never once asked me what I made. Trey went first and he went loud. He said there was a complaint in front of the state board. He said conflict of interest and self-dealing, and that he had my managing partner's direct line and he'd use it again. He said I had been hiding behind a shell company like a criminal. He said, "You did this to a 7-year-old in a room with an escrow officer in it," and he was standing up by the end of it with his hand flat on the table. Nora Pike let him finish, and then said one sentence. "Mr. Voss, my client has no obligation to sign anything today, and every minute of this is being billed to somebody." He sat down, and then Colleen Voss unbuckled her purse. She took out a cashier's check and set it on the laminate in the middle of the table and turned it around so it faced me, and she smoothed it flat with 2 fingers the way you'd smooth a tablecloth. $121,600. Not a round number, not an offer, not a negotiation. The exact payoff, to the penny, drawn on a bank in Cameron, from a woman who had sold her late husband's ground the year before. She said, "I don't know all of this, and I don't want to. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Take it." And then Trey slid 3 documents across, already prepared, already tabbed. One was the subordination agreement. One was a mutual release with a confidentiality provision, permanent, covering any disclosure to any member of either family regarding the origin or acquisition of the note. And one was a single-page acknowledgement stating that the loan had been an ordinary arm's-length investment unrelated to any family relationship. Trey said it almost kindly. "Everybody wins. You get every dollar. Today. Nobody has to know anything." Danielle was crying without sound, the furious, quiet way, and she said, "Please, Kim. Cooper's halfway through 2nd grade, please." And then the door opened again. My mother was standing in it in her good coat with her purse on her forearm. Because Trey had called her that morning and driven up to Gladstone and gotten her, she didn't sit down. She looked at the check on the table and then at me, standing against the wall, And she said it in front of an escrow officer and a loan officer and a woman she barely knew. Do this for your sister. Know your place, Kimmy. It's a good place. I looked down at that check for a long moment. It was exactly what I was owed, every cent of it, sitting there in the middle of the table where anybody could see it. And that is how I knew what it was. I pushed the check back into the middle of the table with one finger, and I opened my folder and laid 3 things down in front of Patrice Cole, because she was the only person in that room whose job it was to look at paper. The certified payoff statement, the servicing history, and the preliminary title report. Then I said the numbers, in a normal voice. The voice I use when I'm telling a man who owns a body shop that his quarter is worse than he thinks. I paid $61,000 for that note in March of 2023. It was every dollar I had, and $15,000 of it was my father's life insurance. In 3 years, I have received $6,900. I have paid Anchor Line $95 a month for 34 months to service it, which comes to $3,230, which I have never billed to anyone. The payoff today is $121,600. It was $121,600 the morning I bought it, and it has been that same number every single day since, because I have never charged $1 of default interest. That note allows 18%. If I had run it the way I was entitled to run it, you would owe me over $183,000 sitting here today. Nobody said anything. The fluorescent tube ticked. Trey was looking at the wall. For 3 years, I told myself I was being generous, I said. I wasn't. I was paying rent. Then I turned to Patrice Cole and I said the only sentence that had any legal effect in that room. I'm not signing the subordination. That was it. That's the whole climax of my life. The loan officer looked at his screen for a second, and then he closed his laptop, and the refinance was over. And then I did the other half, because the other half is the part I actually chose. I turned to Nora and I said it out loud, in front of every one of them, so it could not be walked back. Withdraw the notice of intent to accelerate. No trustees sale. Send them a written forbearance, 120 days, so they can list the house themselves and keep whatever equity is left, and Cooper finishes the school year in that district. I can force a sale, I said. I have been able to force one since the first week of December. I'm not going to. Then I picked up the title report and I slid it across the table to my sister. Not to Trey, to Danielle. I put my finger on 2 lines and I said the numbers and the recording dates and nothing else. Bellamy Supply, 47,300, August. Federal tax line, 28,900, September. She read them. She read them again, the way she counts. Twice, to be sure. Then she looked up at her husband, and he did not look back at her, and that was the entire trial. My mother picked up her purse. She went out the door after Danielle, and she did not say anything to me, and she stopped for about half a second in the doorway with her back to me, and then she kept going. That was the price, and I knew it while it was happening. Colleen Voss picked up her check, folded it once, and put it in her purse, and on her way past me she said, I'm sorry about the chair. Which is the strangest kindness I have ever been shown. I said, for the record, to a nearly empty room, that I did know my place. It has been recorded down at the county since March of 2023. Anybody in that family could have looked. I signed exactly one thing before I left that building, and it was the forbearance letter. Out in the lot, the sky was that flat January gray that doesn't tell you the time. The Tahoe was parked in the second row and Cooper was in the back seat because they'd pulled him out of aftercare, and his window was down 4 inches. He said, Aunt Kim, if you have 100 pennies, is that the same as $1 or is it more? I said it's exactly the same, and it weighs a lot more, and that's the only difference. He thought about that and said, okay. I didn't tell him anything else. Nothing about his mother. Nothing about the fork. Nothing he'd have to carry. Danielle came out and opened the driver's door and looked at me across the roof of that truck for a second, and she didn't say anything either, and then she got in and they drove out onto the highway. I stood there in the lot until my hands stopped shaking, which took longer than I'd like to say. Then I drove back out to Ardmore Street. They listed in March and it sold on the 15th of May for $641,000. After 7% in costs and the payoff to Crossland with the arrears, there was $157,230 left on the settlement statement. I was paid in full. $121,600, all of it, and not because I fought for it. Because my deed of trust was recorded in March of 2022, and theirs were recorded in 2025, and in this country the calendar decides. First in time, first in right. The federal tax line took $28,900. Bellamy Supply got $6,730 of the $47,300 they were owed, and they are still following Trey for the rest, and Missouri lets them. Danielle and Trey walked out of that house with nothing. After ordinary income tax on the discount and after what I paid Nora Pike, I cleared a little over $40,000 on 3 years and every dollar I had. The return was excellent. I would not do it again. Voss Mechanical closed in April. Trey didn't blow up, he just got smaller, month by month, the way they actually do. He and Danielle separated in June. The board dismissed his complaint in May in one paragraph, and the file stays in my record forever anyway, and Brant and Roan moved my review to the following cycle, which cost me a year and about $11,000. My mother did not call me for 5 months. Danielle called me in June. She did not apologize, and I did not need her to. She was renting a 2-bedroom in Gladstone 4 blocks from our mother, and doing part-time books for a dental group off Antioch. And she had a 1099 in her hand that she could not make sense of, and she asked me how to read it. So I told her how to read it. That's all I did. 4 minutes, and I answered the question she asked and not one thing more. The next week I mailed her a statement for a 529 account in Cooper's name with $10,000 in it, and I did not write anything on it. The folding chair is out on my balcony on Ardmore Street. I have my coffee on it every morning. If you take one thing from me tonight, take this. The quiet thing you do for your family stops being a gift the moment it becomes the reason they think they already know what you are worth. And the day you finally say the number out loud, you will not be making a scene. You will be making a record. That's my story. One folding chair. One email I didn't send. One signature I didn't give. If there is something you have been carrying for your family that nobody has ever thanked you for, write the number down somewhere, just for you. That's all. You don't have to send it to anybody. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.